Hello, Capricorn. This energy feels quiet, but it feels heavy at the same time. Somebody here has been trying to convince themselves that moving on was the right thing to do. They have been keeping busy, focusing on work, responsibilities, and everything happening around them. But honestly, the more distance there has been between you, the harder it has become for them to ignore what they truly feel. Wow, this person is starting to look back at this connection very differently. They're realizing that what you gave them was rare. Your patience, your consistency, your loyalty, the way you showed up even when things were not easy. And the question is, why are they thinking about you now? Why are memories that seem buried suddenly coming back to the surface? Why does your absence feel louder than your presence ever did? Because something is changing inside of them. They're beginning to understand that not every connection can be replaced. Not every person can be forgotten. And for some reason, Capricorn, your energy still lingers in their heart, no matter how much time has passed. So let's see what the cards want to reveal, because somebody here may still be carrying far more feelings for you than they've ever been willing to admit. What keeps standing out to me here, Capricorn, is that this person may look completely fine from the outside. They may appear focused on work, responsibilities, daily routines, or whatever is happening in their world right now. And honestly, if you were looking at them from a distance, you might even think they've already moved on. You might think they've accepted everything and left this connection behind. But that's not the energy I'm picking up as these cards begin to unfold. Because the moment I see the Six of Cups, I feel memories. Not loud memories, not dramatic memories, quiet ones. The kind that show up when nobody else is around. The kind that arrive unexpectedly while driving home, sitting alone, or staring out a window after a long day. It's almost like this person keeps revisiting moments they thought they had already put away. Little conversations, little details. The way you laughed at something that wasn't even funny. The way you understood things they never had to explain. The way your presence somehow made everything feel a little easier. Wow, I don't think they expected those memories to stay with them this long, and yet they have. Because when I look at the energy surrounding the Six of Cups, it feels like there are pieces of you still living inside their heart. Pieces they never completely let go of. Then I see the Hermit. And honestly, Capricorn, this person feels incredibly private right now. This doesn't feel like someone who's talking openly about what they're going through. In fact, they may be telling everyone around them that they're okay, that they're focused, that they're moving forward, that everything is fine. But behind closed doors, there's a very different story unfolding. Because the Hermit feels like someone who has spent a lot of time alone with their thoughts. Someone who keeps replaying situations over and over again. Someone who thought distance would bring clarity. Yet somehow the more space that appeared between the two of you, the more your energy seemed to linger, you know? It's interesting. I don't feel like they're trying to remember you. I feel like they're trying not to. And that's a very different thing. Because when someone is forcing themselves not to think about something, that's usually a sign that it's still affecting them. And that's exactly what this energy feels like. Then we have the Four of Swords, and the atmosphere shifts again. Everything becomes quieter, slower, almost reflective. This person has spent a long time sitting with feelings they haven't fully expressed. A long time convincing themselves that staying silent was the safest option. A long time believing that if they waited long enough, the emotions would eventually disappear. But honestly, I don't think they disappeared. I think they settled deeper. Because every time they thought they had reached a place of peace, something would remind them of you. A song, a place, a date on a calendar, a familiar phrase, something small, something insignificant to everyone else. Yet somehow it immediately brings your energy back into the room. And that's why I don't feel like this connection has truly left them. Not emotionally, not mentally, not completely. Then the Page of Swords appears. And wow, this card changes everything. Because suddenly I don't feel distance. I feel curiosity. I feel observation. I feel attention. This person may not be saying much. They may not be reaching out. They may not be expressing everything they feel. But there is still awareness here. There is still interest here. There is still a part of them that wonders how you're doing, what you're thinking, whether you've changed, whether you're happy, whether someone else has taken their place. And I almost feel this internal conflict happening. Part of them wants to know. Part of them is afraid to know. Because what if you've moved forward? What if you've become someone they can no longer reach? What if the opportunity they once had is no longer there? That question feels bigger than they're willing to admit. Because underneath all of this silence, I keep sensing someone who is carrying more emotion than they show. Someone who appears calm but isn't as detached as they pretend to be. Someone who still finds themselves thinking about you during moments they never expected. And as these cards sit together on the table, Capricorn, it feels like this story is only beginning to reveal itself. Because the memories haven't disappeared, the thoughts haven't disappeared, and neither has the connection. If anything, it feels like this person is starting to realize that what they tried to place behind them may still be occupying far more space in their heart than they ever intended. Honestly, what feels different as I continue pulling into this energy is that this person is no longer looking at the connection through the same lens they once did. Something about their perspective is changing. Not because someone forced them to change it. Not because they're being told what to think. It feels more personal than that. It feels like life itself has been teaching them lessons they weren't ready to understand before. And the moment the Five of Cups appears, I feel an emotion that isn't easy for them to sit with. Regret. Not dramatic regret. Not the kind they would openly admit to everyone around them. This feels much quieter, much heavier. The kind that follows someone home at the end of the day. The kind that shows up when there's nobody left to distract them. Because they're beginning to see certain moments differently now. Situations that once felt small suddenly don't feel small anymore. Conversations they brushed aside now seem important. Choices they felt confident about at the time no longer look quite the same. Wow. It's almost like they're revisiting old memories with new eyes. And that's not always comfortable. Because when you start seeing things clearly, you also start seeing your own role in what happened. You start seeing opportunities you didn't take, words you didn't say, feelings you avoided. And I think that's where some of this heaviness is coming from. The realization that there were things about you they quietly depended on without fully appreciating them. The Justice card comes forward and the energy becomes very reflective. This person feels like they're evaluating everything. Not just the connection, themselves, their choices, their priorities, the way they handled certain situations. And Capricorn, what stands out here is that I don't feel blame. I don't feel someone sitting there pointing fingers. I feel someone asking themselves difficult questions. Questions they may have avoided for a long time. Questions like, did I truly recognize what was being offered to me? Did I take this person for granted? Did I assume they would always be there? You know, sometimes people don't realize the value of consistency until consistency is no longer available. And that's what this feels like. Because your energy wasn't loud, it wasn't demanding, it wasn't trying to prove anything. There was something dependable about it, something steady, something safe. And strangely enough, those are often the things people overlook at first, until life becomes unpredictable, until challenges appear, until they find themselves wishing they had someone they could genuinely trust. The Six of Cups shows up again, and I almost feel this person smiling at certain memories while simultaneously feeling sad. It's a strange combination, like warmth and loss existing together. There are moments between the two of you that still feel alive inside them. Moments that have somehow survived all the distance, all the silence, all the distractions. And what fascinates me is that these memories don't feel attached to grand events. They feel attached to simple things, the way you listened, the way you made time, the way you remembered details most people would forget, the way you showed up when there wasn't necessarily anything to gain. Okay, this is where it gets emotional. Because I think this person is beginning to understand that genuine care is actually very rare. A lot rarer than they once believed. And when I look at the Queen of Pentacles sitting here, Capricorn, I can't help but feel that this is how they're viewing you now. Not through fantasy, not through idealization, but through appreciation. They see someone who brought stability, someone who brought calm, someone who carried themselves with maturity, someone who offered support without needing constant recognition for it. And the more they reflect on that, the harder it becomes to convince themselves that you were just another chapter in their story. Because you're not fitting neatly into the past. Your energy keeps finding its way back into the present. There is something about this realization that feels uncomfortable for them because it challenges the narrative they've been telling themselves. The narrative that everything is fine. The narrative that they're unaffected. The narrative that moving forward would automatically make these feelings disappear. Instead, what I'm seeing is someone who is slowly beginning to recognize that certain people leave a mark on your life. Not because they were perfect. Not because the connection was perfect. But because they brought something meaningful that cannot easily be replaced. And as these cards continue unfolding, it feels like that understanding is growing stronger. Almost as if they're standing at the edge of a truth they've been avoiding. A truth that may require them to finally acknowledge just how important you actually became to them. There's something almost exhausting about the energy I'm feeling here, Capricorn. Not because this person doesn't care, quite the opposite. It feels exhausting because they're spending so much energy trying to stay in control of emotions they don't fully understand. And the moment the Eight of Swords appears, I can feel that tension immediately. This person keeps having conversations with themselves that nobody else gets to hear. They tell themselves to focus on practical things, to stay productive, to stay busy, to keep moving. But every time they think they've found a distraction, their thoughts somehow circle back to the same place, back to you, back to unanswered questions, back to things they wish they had handled differently. What fascinates me is that they don't seem comfortable talking about any of this. This isn't somebody who easily admits when they're struggling emotionally. In fact, they may be the type of person who appears strongest when they're hurting the most. The type who keeps showing up, keeps working, keeps performing their responsibilities while carrying an entire emotional storm that nobody can see. And that's where the Nine of Swords begins to emerge. Because beneath the surface, there's a lot more worry here than they're willing to admit. Not necessarily because they're afraid of you, not because they're afraid of the connection. They're afraid of what happens if they waited too long. They're afraid of possibilities they can't control anymore. You know, time has a strange way of changing things. People grow, lives shift, priorities evolve, and I keep sensing this fear quietly sitting in the back of their mind. A fear that while they were busy trying to figure everything out, life may have continued moving forward without them. A fear that maybe you've become stronger than the version of yourself they once knew. A fear that maybe you've stopped waiting. Wow. That thought seems to affect them more than they would ever admit publicly. Because this person likes certainty. They like structure. They like knowing where they stand. But emotions don't always follow rules, and that's exactly what makes this situation feel so difficult for them. The moon appears, and suddenly everything becomes even more complicated. Because I don't feel clarity here, I feel hidden feelings. I feel emotions that have never been fully spoken out loud. This person has been carrying things around for a long time. Not because they wanted to be dishonest, not because they wanted to mislead anyone. Sometimes people stay silent, simply because they don't know how to explain what's happening inside them. And that's what this feels like. A person trying to make sense of emotions that refuse to fit neatly into a box. Honestly, I think there were moments when they convinced themselves these feelings would fade. Moments when they believed enough time would solve everything. Yet here they are, still thinking, still wondering, still feeling something they can't completely dismiss. And because of that, they keep questioning themselves. Questioning their decisions, questioning their timing, questioning what they truly want. The Two of Swords arrives, and it almost feels like standing at a crossroads nobody else can see. Because from the outside, life keeps moving. The world keeps turning. Everything looks normal. But internally, this person is wrestling with choices. One path feels safe, predictable, comfortable. The other path requires vulnerability, honesty, risk. And that's not easy for someone who has spent so much time protecting themselves. Okay. This is where the energy becomes very human, because I don't feel perfection here. I don't feel someone who suddenly has all the answers. I feel someone who is slowly realizing that avoiding a decision is still a decision. And the longer they stay suspended between what they feel and what they show, the heavier this burden becomes. The strange thing is that every attempt to bury these emotions seems to bring them closer to the surface. Every effort to focus elsewhere somehow leads them back to the same unresolved place, back to the same questions. Back to the same connection, back to the same person. And Capricorn, as these cards continue unfolding across the table, it feels like this internal battle is reaching a point where it can no longer stay hidden forever. Because eventually, every heart reaches a moment when silence becomes harder than the truth. Something feels different here, not louder, not more dramatic, just more real. Because as I sit with these cards, Capricorn, I get the sense that this person is no longer looking at this connection through the lens of emotion alone. They're starting to look at it through the lens of their future. And that's a very different place to view someone from. The King of Pentacles immediately catches my attention. Because this doesn't feel like someone chasing excitement anymore. It doesn't feel like someone asking themselves who is the most interesting or who creates the biggest emotional reaction. This feels like someone asking a much deeper question. Who can I build with? Who can I trust? Who would still be standing beside me years from now when life becomes complicated? Those questions seem to carry a lot of weight for this person, especially because I feel like they've spent much of their life trying to create stability, trying to create security, trying to create something lasting. And strangely enough, they're beginning to realize that not everyone fits into that vision. Not everyone can occupy that space. But when they think about you, something shifts. Because your energy doesn't feel temporary to them anymore. It feels substantial. It feels grounded. It feels like something they can actually picture existing beyond a moment or a season. Wow, that realization seems bigger than they expected. Because for a long time, I think they were focused on what was happening right in front of them. The immediate circumstances, the obstacles, the uncertainty, the timing. Yet now they seem to be looking much further ahead. And that's where the Queen of Pentacles enters this story. What fascinates me about her presence is the respect I feel surrounding it. This person isn't just attracted to you. This feels deeper than attraction. There's admiration here. They've started noticing qualities that perhaps they overlooked before. Your consistency, your maturity, the way you handle challenges, the way you care for the people around you, the way you continue moving forward even when life isn't easy. You know, sometimes admiration grows quietly. It doesn't arrive all at once. It develops over time. And that's exactly what this feels like. The more distance they've had to reflect, the more clearly they've begun seeing parts of you they once took for granted. Parts that now feel incredibly valuable. The Ace of Cups appears, and suddenly I feel something softening inside them. Almost like a wall that has been standing for a very long time is beginning to crack. Not collapse, just open, a little. Because this person has spent so much time analyzing, thinking, questioning, trying to understand everything logically. Yet some emotions refuse to be solved like a problem. Some feelings simply want to be acknowledged. And that's what I sense happening here. They're allowing themselves to feel something they may have been resisting. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough to recognize that these emotions haven't disappeared. In fact, they may have grown while they weren't paying attention. Honestly, I don't think that realization was part of their original plan. I think they expected clarity to create distance. Instead, clarity seems to be creating honesty. And honesty is leading them somewhere they didn't expect to go. The Hierophant appears and the atmosphere changes again. Everything becomes more intentional, more serious. Less focused on what feels good in the moment and more focused on what actually matters. This person seems to be evaluating what kind of life they want, what kind of relationship they want, what kind of partner they want standing beside them. And Capricorn, your energy keeps appearing in that picture. Not because they're forcing it. Not because they're trying to romanticize the past, but because when they imagine stability, commitment, trust, and genuine partnership, your presence keeps finding its way into those thoughts. Okay, this doesn't feel like someone daydreaming anymore. This feels like someone slowly considering possibilities they once dismissed. Possibilities that now seem a lot more important than they did before. And while they may not have every answer yet, I can feel something shifting beneath the surface. The hesitation that once seemed immovable is beginning to loosen. The distance between what they feel and what they're willing to admit is becoming smaller. And as these cards continue unfolding across the table, it feels like this person is approaching a moment where reflection alone may no longer be enough. Because when someone starts seeing another person as part of the future they're trying to build, the questions they ask themselves become very different from the questions they were asking before. A realization seems to be settling into this person's heart now, Capricorn. Not all at once, not like a lightning strike, more like the slow arrival of a truth they've been trying to outrun. And the moment I see judgment appear, I can feel that shift, because something inside them is becoming impossible to ignore. The excuses that once felt convincing don't seem to hold the same weight anymore. The reasons they gave themselves for staying quiet, for waiting, for postponing difficult conversations, for convincing themselves there would always be more time. Those reasons are beginning to crumble. And honestly, I think that's making them uncomfortable. Because awareness creates responsibility. Once you recognize something important, it's difficult to pretend you don't see it anymore. And that's exactly where this person seems to be standing. At the edge of a decision they've avoided for much longer than they expected. You know, there are moments in life when people realize they have been protecting themselves so much that they've also been protecting themselves from happiness. And that's what this energy feels like. A person recognizing that fear may have cost them more than they were willing to admit. The Ace of Swords appears and everything suddenly feels sharper, clearer, not easier, but clearer. The confusion that surrounded this connection for so long seems to be lifting. And with that clarity comes honesty. Not necessarily honesty spoken out loud yet, at least not fully, but honesty within themselves. The kind that happens when you're alone and finally stop arguing with your own heart. Wow! This person feels like they're reaching that point. The point where they can no longer deny what they feel, no longer dismiss it, no longer reduce it to something temporary, because every road they've taken seems to keep leading them back to the same place. back to the same connection, back to the same questions, back to you. And Capricorn, what stands out here is that I don't feel somebody wanting perfection anymore. I feel somebody wanting authenticity. They don't seem interested in maintaining appearances. They're becoming more concerned with what is real, what matters, what still deserves a chance. The Eight of Wands enters and the atmosphere begins to move. That's the first thing I notice. Movement. After so much reflection, after so much hesitation, after so much internal debate, something feels ready to shift. Maybe not dramatically, maybe not overnight, but the energy itself doesn't feel stuck anymore. And that's important, because there comes a point where thoughts alone stop being enough, where imagining conversations becomes exhausting, where replaying scenarios no longer provides answers. Eventually, people reach a stage where they either act or remain trapped inside the same cycle. Okay, this person seems aware of that now. They're realizing that silence has not solved anything. Silence has not created peace. Silence has not made the feelings disappear. If anything, it has only given those feelings more room to grow, and that realization feels significant. Because for someone who once believed waiting was the safest option, they're beginning to question whether waiting is actually creating more distance than protection. The Two of Wands appears, and suddenly I feel planning, not fantasy, planning. This person seems to be looking ahead, considering possibilities, thinking about outcomes, thinking about what happens if they take a step forward, thinking about what happens if they don't. And strangely enough, the second question feels heavier, because they can already imagine what life looks like if nothing changes. They've been living in that reality. They know exactly how it feels. What they don't know is what could happen if they finally choose courage instead of avoidance. There's a quiet determination growing here. It's subtle, but it's there. The kind that develops when somebody gets tired of carrying unfinished emotions. The kind that develops when somebody realizes they're no longer at peace with leaving things unresolved. And as these cards continue unfolding across the table, Capricorn, it feels like this person is getting closer to a moment where intentions may start becoming actions. Because once the heart reaches a certain level of clarity, standing still begins to feel far more difficult than taking the first step. What feels most noticeable now, Capricorn, is that the energy no longer seems focused on what was lost. It's becoming focused on what could still be created. And that's a very important difference. Because when someone spends enough time reflecting, eventually their attention begins to shift from the past toward the future. Not because the past stops mattering, but because they start asking themselves a different question. Instead of wondering what happened, they begin wondering what is still possible. And that's exactly what I feel as the Chariot appears. There is movement here, not rushed movement, not impulsive movement. This feels intentional, measured, purposeful. Almost like somebody has finally chosen a direction after standing at a crossroads for a very long time. You know, one thing about this person is that they don't seem interested in temporary solutions anymore. They don't want a conversation that changes nothing. They don't want a moment that disappears the next day. If they're thinking about taking a step forward, it feels like they're thinking beyond the immediate moment. They're thinking about where that road could actually lead. And honestly, that's what makes this energy feel so mature, because it isn't being driven by loneliness. It isn't being driven by fear. It's being driven by realization, the realization that certain connections deserve more than avoidance. Wow! The Wheel of Fortune enters the reading, and everything begins to feel bigger somehow. Not dramatic, just meaningful. Because this person seems to be looking back at the path that brought them here. The unexpected turns, the lessons, the mistakes, the moments that forced them to grow. And what surprises me is that every time they look at that journey, your presence appears somewhere within it. Not as a coincidence, not as a random chapter, but as somebody who influenced their growth in ways they didn't fully appreciate at the time. There are people who enter our lives and simply pass through. Then there are people who leave a permanent mark on how we see ourselves, how we love, how we trust, how we approach the future. And Capricorn, this person seems to be realizing that you've become one of those people. Okay, this is where the energy becomes incredibly sincere. Because I don't feel them chasing fantasy. I feel them recognizing value, recognizing significance, recognizing that some connections continue teaching us something long after the initial chapter seems finished, and that awareness is changing the way they view you. The Ten of Cups appears, and I immediately feel this person imagining possibilities they may have avoided before, not because they're building castles in the sky, because they're allowing themselves to consider happiness, real happiness, the kind that isn't based on appearances, the kind that isn't based on validation, the kind that comes from sharing life with somebody who genuinely understands you. This person may not say it openly, At least not yet. But I keep sensing that when they think about peace, your energy somehow enters the picture. When they think about emotional fulfillment, your energy enters the picture. When they imagine building something meaningful, your energy enters the picture. And the interesting thing is that these thoughts don't feel forced. They arrive naturally, almost unexpectedly, as though their heart has already started answering questions their mind is still trying to catch up with. Then the sun appears. And honestly, everything feels lighter. Not because every problem has disappeared, not because every uncertainty has vanished, but because there is truth here. There is warmth here. There is a growing sense of confidence surrounding what they feel. The doubts that once seemed overwhelming don't appear quite as powerful anymore. The fear that kept them frozen doesn't seem to have the same control, because this person is beginning to understand something very simple. Life becomes a lot harder when you walk away from something valuable simply because you're afraid of it. And I think they're finally seeing that. They're seeing your importance. They're seeing your consistency. They're seeing the space you continue to occupy within their heart. And perhaps most importantly, they're seeing the future differently than they did before. Because the future no longer feels like a place where you're absent. It feels like a place where your presence still matters, a place where possibilities still exist, a place where a new chapter may be waiting to unfold. And as I look across these final cards, Capricorn, what stays with me isn't urgency. It isn't pressure, it isn't certainty. It's something much quieter than that. It's the feeling of someone who has finally stopped running from what they truly value. Someone who understands that some people are too important to leave behind without at least discovering where the path between two hearts could have led. And Capricorn, that's where we're going to leave the reading for now. What stands out to me most isn't whether this person reaches out tomorrow, next week, or sometime further down the road. It's the fact that something inside them has changed. A perspective has shifted. A truth they've been avoiding is becoming harder to ignore. And sometimes, that internal shift is where every new chapter begins. Remember, this is a collective reading, so take what resonates and simply leave behind what doesn't. Trust your own intuition above all else, because nobody knows your story better than you do. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I truly appreciate your energy, your presence, and the trust you bring into this space every time we connect. If this reading spoke to your heart in some way, I'm grateful our paths crossed here. Take good care of yourself, Capricorn. Keep moving at your own pace. Keep honoring your worth. And keep choosing the people and connections that genuinely bring peace into your life. Until our next reading, I'm sending you so much love, so much light, and wishing you nothing but the very best on your journey. Okay, I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye for now.